back, dreamer. You've arrived at a place where stories grow gently and wisdom flows like water. This channel is a quiet space to rest. We share calming bedtime stories, softly spoken, inspired by ancient philosophies. Tales that don't preach or push, but simply offer space for stillness, for reflection, and for a peaceful return to yourself. If these stories help you relax, unwind, or drift off to sleep, please consider liking the video, subscribing, or leaving a comment. It helps us grow this gentle corner of the world. Tonight, we begin a new chapter in our journey, a gentle storybook series following 4 quiet companions. Bramble, the thoughtful badger. Wimble, the curious squirrel. Tess, the city-wise fox turned gardener. And Nilo, the silent heron who watches more than he speaks. Together, they explore life's softer truths, the power of stillness, the beauty of letting go, and the peace that comes when we stop trying to force things and simply follow the rhythm of the world. Each story in this series is inspired by ancient philosophy, like Taoism, Stoicism, and other timeless teachings, woven into calming tales that help you unwind, reflect, and drift gently into sleep. And if you feel moved to, leave a comment below. I'd love to know what resonated with you tonight, or even just a thank you. It means more than you think. So if your thoughts are full, or your heart simply needs a place to settle, you're in the right place. Close your eyes now, if you haven't already. Let your body settle. Let your shoulders fall just a little heavier. Feel the bed, the blanket, the ground beneath you. Soft, safe, steady. Take a slow, quiet breath in through your nose. Hold it gently and exhale like a wave letting go of the shore. Again, breathe in, hold it gently, and exhale. There's nowhere to be but here. Nothing to do but listen. That's all you need to be tonight. Not fixed, not perfect, just here. And now, let the story begin.
began on a morning brushed with gold, the kind of morning where the light dapples through leaves like soft honey, and even the breeze seems to be humming a tune. Wimble had woken early, a rarity in itself, and he had a feeling today he was going to be productive. He dashed from the tree, list in paw. He was going to gather acorns, clean his nook, visit the glade, paint a picture, and maybe even write a poem. But things didn't go as planned. One by one his tasks tangled. The acorns rolled away. His paint was dry. The glade was busy with bees. And the poem, well, it just wouldn't start. Frustrated, Wimble flopped beneath the hollow tree with a groan. Bramble looked over from his tea and said nothing at first. Just passed Wimble a warm cup. After a while, Bramble said, "You don't have to chase the day, Wimble. Sometimes it comes to sit beside you." Wimble blinked. He hadn't thought of it like that. The two sat in silence, and slowly the wind began to rustle the leaves. A bee buzzed past without hurry, and Wimble for once let the moment arrive on its own. The next morning, Wimble found Bramble kneeling in the garden behind the hollow tree, or rather, staring at it. He wasn't planting or watering or weeding, just watching. "Shouldn't you do something?" Wimble asked, hopping over a stone. Bramble smiled slowly. "I did, last season. Now it's the garden's turn." Wimble tilted his head. "But the weeds are winning." Tess, who had been nibbling mint nearby, chimed in. "They're not weeds, Wimble, just part of it." "But don't you want it to look tidy?" Wimble asked. Bramble paused, then said, "Tidy isn't always true." They all stood quietly, watching the soft mess of wild thyme, curling tendrils, and sunflowers growing where no one had planted them. After a while, Wimble sat too, and in the stillness he began to notice a butterfly landing on a crooked stalk, a new sprout winding up a fallen branch, bees dancing between blossoms Tess hadn't tended. Seems to know what it's doing, Wimble whispered. Bramble nodded. Things often do when we let them. It happened just after dawn. The three friends, Wimble, Bramble and Tess, stood at the edge of the grove, blinking in disbelief. The pond was gone, where there had always been water, still, silver, sometimes full of frogs. There was only cracked earth, mud veins curling like tired roots. What happened? Tess asked softly. Drought, Bramble murmured, rubbing his chin. Wimble peered nervously around. But what will Nilo do? He lives here. Just then, they spotted him. Nilo stood in the middle of the dry pond, perfectly still, not worried, not moving, just waiting. They watched from the shore, uncertain. After a long silence, Wimble couldn't help himself. He tiptoed closer and called out, "Aren't you upset?" Nilo turned slowly, blinking once. "It is only water," he said. "But it's gone," Wimble squeaked. "Yes," Nilo replied. "And so there is room." "For what?" Tess asked. Nilo tilted his head toward the empty sky. "For whatever may come next." The others stood beside him then, Bramble, Tess, and a still curious Wimble. And in the quiet, they began to feel it too. The pond was not broken. It was not lost. It was resting, breathing, becoming space. And in that space, their minds became a little quieter too. Tess liked things a certain way. She liked neat rows of radishes, evenly spaced marigolds, and the feeling of soft earth under her paws, freshly turned and ready. The garden behind the hollow tree was her quiet pride, a place of order, beauty, and predictability. But that morning, something had changed. The vines had twisted across the walkways. The beans had spilled into the thyme, and the marigolds, oh, the marigolds, had been flattened by a wandering badger nap. Tess stood at the edge of the mess, tail twitching, ears flat. "Who moved the stones?" she called. Silence. "Why are the peas climbing the tree?" More silence. She was just about to stomp her paw when Bramble wandered by, a crumb of muffin in his fur. "Oh, the garden's looking lively," he said cheerfully. Tess blinked. "It's a disaster." Bramble looked again. Or maybe it's just doing something you didn't expect. She stared at him, unconvinced. "You know," he added, picking a crooked carrot, "not everything grows in straight lines." Later that afternoon, Tess sat in the middle of her unruly garden. She touched the vines. She watched the beans stretch toward the light, and in the tangled mess, she began to see freedom. The garden wasn't broken. It had simply stopped trying to follow her plan. So she let it. And somehow in that yielding, the garden breathed a little deeper, and so did she. Wimble had been visiting the clearing again. There, just beyond the edge of the woods, lived the Finch family. They had a mushroom swing, a pebble mosaic, and a tree house with tiny curtains. When Wimble came home, his own nook in the hollow tree felt small, plain, quiet, not nearly as exciting. He poked at his old acorn collection. He frowned at his lumpy pillow. He sighed at the single tiny window that looked only at moss. That afternoon he went to Nilo, who stood as usual at the water's edge, staring into the stillness. "Nilo," Wimble asked, "don't you ever want more?" Nilo blinked, slow and calm. "I have water," he said, "and sky, and time." Wimble blinked back. "That's not much." Nilo nodded. "It's enough." Wimble sat down, confused. Later, he returned to his nook. The moss in the window glowed with the late sun. A breeze drifted in, carrying the scent of pine. And his acorns, well, they weren't fancy, but each one had a memory. He lay down, and as the evening deepened, so did his breath. It wasn't a tree house. It wasn't the finch's swing. But it was his, and that night, with nothing new and nothing extra, Wimble slept the deepest he had in moons. The others were busy. Tess was planting late summer beans. Wimble was organising his leaf-pressed art, and Bramble was hauling a particularly lumpy root from one side of the garden to the other. Meanwhile, Nilo stood at the water's edge, still as a stone. Hours passed. "Does he ever do anything?" Wimble whispered to Tess, watching the heron from a distance. Tess shrugged. "I once saw him blink. It was momentous." That afternoon, a sudden wind swept through the grove. Tess's garden sign toppled. Bramble's root rolled away, and Wimble's art fluttered into the river like dry birds. Panic, movement, noise. But Nilo, he calmly stepped into the shallows, and with 3 quiet motions gathered the fallen things. He returned them without a word. Only then did he speak. "When you're still long enough," he said softly, "you notice where the current is going before it moves." they stared. Nilo went back to the water's edge. The wind had passed. And the grove now seemed quieter than before, as if something unseen had settled back into place. That evening, Wimble sat beside Nilo without a word. He didn't understand it all yet, but he could feel it, and that was enough. Tess had always kept her garden tidy. Straight rows of herbs, neatly pruned vines, labels written in perfect ink, thyme, chamomile, lemon balm. It soothed her, this order. It reminded her of how she used to manage things in the city, projects, people, plans. She didn't miss that life, not really, but the need to manage, that was harder to leave behind. One morning, Tess noticed something. The mint had jumped the path. The wildflowers had invited themselves in. Even a pumpkin had appeared, uninvited and already flowering. She frowned. Then she fetched her gloves. It was time to correct things. But just as she reached for the spade, Bramble wandered by, trailing a dandelion behind him. "Beautiful," he said, gazing at the unruly tangle of green. "Beautiful." Tess blinked. "It's a mess." Bramble smiled. "Maybe it's just free." She looked again. The vines curled like dancers. The colours shimmered like music. And the pumpkin, well, it had chosen a lovely spot. Tess put down her spade. That afternoon, she brewed mint tea from the rebellious patch, and instead of pruning, she simply watched. Something inside her loosened. Not everything needed to be fixed. Some things just needed space to grow. That evening, Tess painted a new sign, "Garden of Surprises," and for the first time in a long while, she went to bed smiling without needing everything to be tidy. The wind began just after dusk. At first it whispered, rustling the tall grasses and sending a few leaves dancing. But by moonrise it howled, tugging at branches, rattling shutters and swirling petals through the grove like startled birds. Inside the hollow tree, Wimble was pacing. "Should we do something?" he squeaked. "What if it gets worse?" Tess peeked out the window. "It's only wind." "But what if it never stops?" Wimble insisted. Bramble, slow as ever, was calmly gathering extra blankets. "We can't stop the wind," he said, laying one across Wimble's shoulders. "But we can choose how we sit through it." Nilo the heron, who had flown in just before dark, stood near the doorway. "Even the fiercest gust finds stillness again," he said quietly. They all listened to the creak of the tree, to the rhythm of the wind, to each other. Old Root, the great tree itself, didn't tremble. Its roots reached deep into the earth. Its branches swayed with the gusts, not against them. It yielded, never fighting, never falling. Tess lit a small lantern. Wimble curled beside Bramble. Nilo folded his wings, and together they waited, not in fear, but in presence. When dawn came, the wind was gone. Only petals remained, scattered like stars across the floor. No one had fixed the wind. No one had outsmarted the storm. But they had stayed soft, and because of that, they were still whole. It started with a crumpled map. Wimble had found it, tucked beneath an old teacup in Bramble's reading nook. Faded ink, curled corners, and a dotted line that led off the page, with only 2 words beside it. Not yet. "What's this?" Wimble asked, eyes wide. Bramble took a long sip of tea. "That," he said, "is a path I never followed." Wimble's ears perked. "Why not?" "I didn't know where it led," Bramble said simply, "and I didn't need to." Wimble, of course, needed to. By mid-morning, the group had gathered, Wimble with his knapsack, Tess with snacks, Nilo gliding overhead, and Bramble bringing up the rear, slightly grumbling, but smiling all the same. The dotted line led them past familiar stones and forgotten turns. At one point, the path simply stopped. No more dots, Wimble frowned. No more map, Tess corrected. Which means we're really on it now. They wandered through thickets, waded across shallow brooks, climbed over mossy logs. It wasn't always easy, but it was never wrong. Because every turn brought something new. A patch of wildflowers Tess hadn't seen in years. A rock shaped like a sleeping rabbit. A tree that hummed when the wind blew through its limbs. And finally, just as the sun dipped low, they came to a clearing, a still pool reflecting the sky. It wasn't a treasure or a grand view. It was just right, quiet, unknown, enough. Wimble looked at the others. Maybe we don't need a map for next time. Bramble smiled. We never did. Golden mornings came and went. Evening mist curled gently over the roots, and inside, beneath its quiet branches, something had shifted. Not loudly, not suddenly, but like a leaf finally ready to fall. Each of the companions had changed, though none of them would have said they'd planned it. Wimble had learned he didn't need to rush to matter. That rest is not wasted, that not knowing can be a kind of wisdom. Bramble had shared more than his tea, offering silence as a gift and presence as an answer. Nilo had watched patiently, knowing the ripples speak louder than the splash. He taught them all how to wait without worry. Tess, once sharp and quick and full of stories from the city, had begun to soften. She had found in gardening what she'd never found in winning. The joy of tending, not chasing. And even old Root, the tree itself, had offered lessons in the way it stood, in the way it let go, in the way it held everything without holding on. Each tale they lived was small, but none of them were without weight, because the stories of the hollow tree weren't really about what happened. They were about how it happened, slowly, softly, naturally. Why these stories matter now. You may not live in a forest. You may not sip tea with a badger or follow a squirrel down a winding path. But perhaps you felt rushed like Wimble, worried like Tess, still but unsure like Nilo. Perhaps you too are trying to find your way in a world that never stops asking for more. These stories, like the Taoist wisdom beneath them, aren't here to fix you. They're here to remind you that even in uncertainty, you can trust the path to reveal itself. That you're allowed to pause, that you don't have to control every outcome, that there's strength in softness and depth in stillness. So whenever you feel lost or hurried or too tangled to rest, return here, back to the tree, back to the rhythm of things. And remember, you don't have to chase the day. Sometimes it comes to sit beside you